The House has approved rent control. And I've got to be honest, I mean, it seemed like this was the plan. Like day one of the legislative session, they gave rent control a hearing. I don't know that you give rent control a hearing day one unless you are very committed to trying to get rent control across the finish line. And that is what I have expressed about this. I mean, this to me is one of the most dangerous policies that's being pushed in Olympia this year because of just how devastating it will be to our entire economy. And it's also, I think, one of the most hypocritical bills being pushed this session. And it shows the true disconnect between, when Democrats say, here's the problem, and they identify the problem, and then they push things that make that problem way worse and seemingly don't connect the two things. I mean, they say the housing crisis is one of the biggest issues facing our state. I mean, they lie and say that's what's contributing to homelessness, which just isn't true. That's a drug crisis. But look, housing is expensive. Rent is expensive. Buying a house is expensive. That's true. But then they go and they push and do all of these things that make it even more expensive, like the reparations bill we discussed. Now, when you go buy a home, you have to pay like $1,000 extra to the recorder's office because you're paying into a reparations program. So while they're complaining about the cost of buying a home, they're actively doing all these things that make buying a home much, much more expensive. And there's a million things I could add to that list. So rent control is going to do the same thing. First of all, rent control is absolutely going to scare any developers away from building new housing in Washington. Bob Ferguson, his goal of building hundreds of thousands of new units, it's not going to be possible. And then you're going to have people who right now have rental units, mostly smaller or mid-sized landlords, and they're going to say, I'm getting the heck out of here. I'm going to sell this property. If it's a single family home, I'm just going to sell it and some family's going to buy it to live in. So then the availability of rental units, I mean, this is just like basic economics. This is what's happened in rent control when it's been instituted in other places. And I don't know if Democrats are willfully blind to that, if they're just trying to like please the far left base. I don't know what's going on because it's so obvious that rent control will do the exact opposite of what they're trying to convince people that rent control will do. Now, in the interest of positive reinforcement, there were a couple Democrats, I believe 3, right, who voted against it in the House. Not enough. But I'll give him credit for it. Thank you. So let's see. Representative Strom Peterson. Let's start with some Democrats who argued in favor of it. So this is Representatives Strom Peterson and Julia Reed arguing in favor of the rent control policy.
We are getting there. We are making incredible progress. But in the meantime, because of our lack of supply, the market is a little crazy, is a little wonky. And the people that are suffering are the people that are renting. The people that are suffering are the people that are seeing 20, 30, 40, 50% rent increases year after year.
What we haven't done, Madam Speaker, is much for stabilization to help the thousands upon thousands of renters in our state who are just asking for a little regulation and predictability. As a landlord, I'm also asking for that, Madam Speaker, and I also know that it's important.
Fine, then do it for your rental unit. Do it for your rental unit. Don't increase rents. And see how they, as a matter of fact, Representative Reed never increased rent. That would be the right thing to do, right? You should drop rent, in fact. You should lose money on your rental unit. And this idea from Strom Peterson, who used to be reasonable, people are seeing 50% increases in your rent. Have you ever seen a 50% increase in your rent? And if you have, yeah, that sounds a little ridiculous to me. But that is absolutely the exception and not the rule. I rented for a long time in Seattle. I never experienced anything even remotely close to a 50% increase in rent. And also, all of that aside, rent control will not help that. Rent control will make it worse because, as we've discussed many times, if you cap it at 7% increases, they will do at every opportunity a 7% increase to hedge their bets. So you are basically guaranteeing yearly 7% increases for every renter in the state. Now, this was an interesting, Representative Sharon Santos, she represents like the Columbia City, Rainier Valley area. She voted against it. Okay, thank you. And I have never clapped for anything she does, so that's a good job. But her speech was kind of weird because she's like, I'm glad it's passing, but I'm not voting for it.
I'm concerned about the impact of extraordinary rising costs on the ability of these landlords to maintain affordable housing units in my district and in yours, Madam Speaker. insurance, utilities, contractors for maintenance and repairs and more capital improvements, and taxes are all rising. We know that the OIC noted that homeowners insurance increased by 24% last year, and the UTC just approved 12% increases in electricity for this year and 9.4% increases in gas. I am glad to see that this advances because I believe the state must continue to be vigilant about doing what it can to contain affordability, and because I believe housing is a human right. But today I will vote no.
That's interesting. Like, I'm glad it's passing, but I'm voting no. That's a weird position to take on it. But she outlines some of the cost increases that she knows, even she knows, and she's a fairly progressive member of the House Democratic Caucus, that even she knows are cost increases for landlords. And where does a cost increase for landlords go? Like increased cost of electricity and stuff. That goes to tenants, right? So even she sees that and she can do the math and say, okay, well, capping rent increases might put landlords in a difficult situation, then we're going to lose units. So 3 Democrats had the sense to vote against this. That's not enough. And so it is advancing over to the Senate. We asked Sean Flynn with the Rental Housing Association of Washington to talk about what happens next. Sean Flynn, not where we want to be, right?
No, yesterday was not the best day for the industry or the state. But, hopefully, there's some good news. Hopefully the Senate will take pause and really consider the larger impacts of this bill. Notably, the rent control bill did not go down on a strict party line vote. So some Democrats saw the light and realized that this was a bad bill. Hopefully there are more Democrats like that in the Senate so that we can preserve a little bit of sanity and our economy in the state.
Gosh, I mean, it's one of the worst things that could happen to the state, frankly. And it's so contrary to what they complain about, which is a truth, right? That housing costs are really high. So it's like, okay, you're going to do something that's going to make it even worse for renters. And it's hard to wrap your mind around the inability, it seems, to understand that. You had mentioned there was 3 Democrats who voted against it. We just played a cut from one of them, which was kind of interesting because she's like, I'm glad it's passing, but I'm not going to vote for it. How much work did you guys have to do behind the scenes to even get 3 Democrats to vote against it?
Well, the RHA and the whole industry has been working hard to educate lawmakers on these issues. And it's difficult. And I think the clip that you played was Representative Santos.
Yeah.
And what's difficult about this issue is that there are real problems from the fact that we don't have enough supply. So when proponents of the bill say, yeah, but rent's really high, no one is disagreeing on that. We disagree on what the solution is. We all want housing to be more affordable in the state of Washington. What this bill does is the opposite of that, though. That's the problem. The problem isn't that that the rent is too high. The problem is the fact that we believe that the solution to that is supply, supply, supply. The best way to keep rents down is a 10% vacancy rate. I mean, we need to look no further than Austin, Texas, to prove that in real time. Year over year rents in Austin, Texas are down 20%. Why? Because they built close to 50,000 units, new units. And that has forced rent down dramatically in Austin. And we should take a playbook out of that city's policy and build. But we're not doing that. Instead, we're instituting a policy that's going to not only stop the creation of housing, it's going to chase existing housing away. And when you do that, and when you mess with the housing economy in the state of Washington, our estimates are looking at $9 billion that will add in lost tax revenue to the state budget. This bill is a catastrophe, not just for housing, but for the economy as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I really hope what you said there, though, is the thing that, I got to be honest, I don't have a lot of faith in the state Senate. I'll talk about that in a second. To me, I almost, and you've never heard me say this, Sean, I almost think that Bob Ferguson might be the saving grace on this one, because he's leaned so much in his campaign promise about all of the housing he wants to build. I'm hopeful someone's in his ear telling him, if you sign this into law, you will not be able to make good on that campaign promise, and we will not be able to build the number of new units that you have promised. But on the Senate side, so this goes over to the Senate, I was just there on Friday. I watched the Senate on a party line vote pass pay for striking workers, which I consider to be a very insane policy, a very, very fringe policy. I mean, even Gavin Newsom vetoed pay for striking workers in California. So am I wrong to not have a whole lot of faith that the Senate will see reason on this one?
Well, I'm hoping that the fringe bills are done in the Senate. What I'm hoping is that at this point, the dollars and cents of this makes a lot of sense to senators who, and remember, the Senate is supposed to be a more deliberative body, right? And what we're hoping here at RHA is that the Senate can see the math on this and realize that if they pass this, the rest of any policy goals that they're going to have, they won't have the money to do. It's not just about the housing that you're going to lose. It's also about those tax rev dollars. And all this, the Senate has their own problems with their budget right now as well. So if we want to build the number of housing units that our new governor has decided that the campaign promise of 200,000 units, there's no way that happens if this bill gets passed. And the budget problems that we have now become permanent because you will strip $9 billion out of the tax pots for the state. And I don't know how they make that money back up.
Yeah, gosh, I'm worried about this one. I mean, this will be it will dig our state into such a deep hole. I don't see how we recover from it. And I'm hopeful, I share some hope that I think there are some reasonable Democrats in the Senate who have made good votes on other things, not the pay for striking workers. And so I'm hoping that they can see reason. I'm waiting for a leader to stand up, among Washington state Democrats, and say, hey guys, we're taking things too far. And I just really haven't seen that. I feel like we had the Senator Mark Mullet and the Senator Kevin Vandeweghe, and we underappreciated them while they were there. And I'm missing them very, very much right now. I guess I know you're having messages with them behind the scenes, but what would be the message to senators who have yet to vote on this and to Governor Ferguson?
Well, I mean, as much as you may not like it, Brandi, maybe that leader is Bob Ferguson, right? Maybe
I will be nice to him, Sean. I'll be nice to him for a whole month if he vetoes rent control.
Yeah, I'm just saying, Governor Ferguson, whether you agree with him or not, no one thinks he's not smart. In fact, everyone agrees he's generally the smartest guy in the room. And so we're hoping that he is that leader for us and for the state. And again, coming back to Senator Mullet and Senator Vandeweghe, we did not appreciate them as much as we should have when they were in the Senate. And I think that with their departures, I think the leadership has yet to coalesce around a moderate voice in the Senate. And we're hoping that happens soon.
Yeah. And I will just say quick on that, not to dwell on the past, but this is a lesson, I think, for Republican voters to get behind moderate Democrats in districts and in races where the Republican has no chance of winning. I think that's been a mistake that they've made. I think that to the extent possible, if you have races that are clearly going to be a D that comes out victorious, Republicans have to suck it up and support moderate Democrats, or we're going to continue to have policies like this pushed without much resistance in Olympia.
Yeah, I mean, RHA is a nonpartisan organization, and I always say we support sanity, right? I don't care what party you are. If you can do math and understand that a policy is bad for the state, and in this case, bad for the resident and the housing provider, you're my candidate of choice. I think to your larger point is that the politics in the state of Washington have moved extreme in both directions. Right, to the point that it is difficult to speak reason to electeds in certain situations, and rent control is one of them. This rent control is a policy that no serious person should take seriously. It has failed in follow the science, right? It's failed in every jurisdiction it's ever been tried in. massively. The economists all agree. The economists agree on rent control the same way paleontologists agree on dinosaurs. You can't be pro-dinosaur and pro-rent control at the same time.
I don't get the reference, but
yeah. Well, I mean, the point is the science tells us the economics of rent control doesn't work. And if you're going to be the party that follows the science, you've got to say rent control doesn't work. Otherwise, you're not following the science.
Well, you could say, like, you can't be pro-dinosaur and pro-asteroid, you know?
Yeah,
it's like
totally.
The same thing, right?
For sure, right? Yeah. And so, you either believe the science or you don't. And science, the science of economics doesn't get to work and not work when it fits your political motives. And that's what's so dangerous about this bill, is that we may pass it. If it passes for political reasons, it's going to have real economic impacts on the lives of Washingtonians for a very long time.
I've got one. I'm going to throw it out there as a positive reinforcement. I think Mike Chapman over in the Senate can be our sane champion. I've seen him take some reasonable votes. He's new to the Senate, came over from the House side, represents a blue-collar district out on the peninsula that would be dramatically impacted by this policy. So Chapman, we need you right now, buddy. We need you right now. Talk some sense into folks. All right, Sean Flynn. Hey, we appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Have a good day.
Yeah, so I don't know what's going to happen here. Look, if Bob Ferguson is the one who ultimately vetoes it, I will give Bob Ferguson all the credit in the world for that. I think one of the things that we've talked a lot about is that Bob Ferguson looks out for Bob Ferguson. So if he thinks it's important for his political career to kill rent control because he wants to make good on his campaign promise to be able to build a bunch of new housing units, then at the end of the day, like, I would support Bob Ferguson in looking out for his own political career to try to avoid utter disaster in the state of Washington. That segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends at RHA. We do a segment with them on housing every week, really building up to what we knew was going to be the eventuality that they try to push through rent control. As you know, RHA is down there fighting for landlords every single day, landlords who are small to mid-size, who have a few units, and they're just trying to stay afloat. So if you're not a member of RHA, sign up today. RHAWA.org, RHAWA.org.